Hello YouTube. So I'm going to be reading from my own chapter from the Polyglot project today. I'm live streaming here to Facebook Live instead of YouTube actually, just to change things up a bit. So to begin, and I haven't read this in quite some time, and I'm also going to give some commentary on it as to what I'm doing now or what I think now. But to begin here, it has been said that knowing one language is like living in an enormous mansion and locking yourself in one room. This mansion we all live in is the world. The world is full of languages and cultures that are just waiting to be explored. I have left that lonely room and ventured into other rooms, learning about languages and developing my own methodologies. I have found throughout my life that the benefits to learning languages are endless. The first time I ever became aware that there was such a thing as another language, I was only about 2 or 3 years old. I was visiting my great-grandparents in Vienna, South Dakota, which was a big trip for me at the time, since I was living near the Twin Cities in Eden Prairie, Minnesota. My great-grandparents were both full-blooded Norwegians whose ancestors had made their way from their cold, wet Scandinavian homeland, crossing the Atlantic Ocean to settle in North America. Even though my family has been in North America for a few generations now, they still speak some Norwegian and have held firm in their Norwegian attitudes and values. I remember being both confused and fascinated the first time I heard them speaking to each other in Norwegian. I remember my great-grandmother teaching me how to say thank you in Norwegian, mange takk, or taskeraha, and thought it was the coolest thing on earth. I remember that moment vividly because they passed away shortly thereafter. My great-grandparents are always in the back of my mind. They introduced me to foreign language. They were my wonderful Norwegian-speaking great-grandparents. Since they spoke so much Norwegian at home, my grandma naturally picked it up and can speak it to this day. So I found out actually from my grandmother that they didn't speak it at home quite as much as I previously thought. They were more encouraging the mastery of English to gain social prestige. But my grandmother, she went to Augsburg University in the Twin Cities, and she studied Norwegian there as well as having learned some at home. She was very interested and wanted to keep it going, and she still has her textbook to this day on Norwegian. So it brings my grandmother great delight when I express myself using Norwegian words and phrases, because I had this experience at such a young age. Norwegian is a language very close to my heart. I hope someday to speak fluent Norwegian and to visit Norway and to see the land of my ancestors. I still hope that, but I don't know if I'll ever master Norwegian, unfortunately. The second time I encountered another language was when I was about 5 years old. I was visiting my paternal grandmother. I remember playing in her backyard when I saw a man with a large beard come out of her house, subsequently followed by my dad and my grandparents. This was my grandmother's brother, Jerry, from Germany. I had always known that I had relatives in Germany, but this was my first time meeting an actual relative. I don't really remember much about my interaction with him, but I can tell you what he looked like and what clothes he was wearing. I know that was the day when my grandma first introduced me to the German language. She taught me some of the words that she knew at the time, and I was very interested. That was the day I learned the German word danke, thank you. At the time, I was only a young kid and did not think much more of the encounter, but I never forgot that word. Later on, when I was about 12 years old, I had another experience with German. Having by then become interested in music, I was at the time really into hard rock and heavy metal. It was then that I had come across a German band called Rammstein. Rammstein is an industrial rock band from Germany. Their unique instrumentals and lyrics instantly got me hooked, It was their influence that motivated me to explore more about Germany and German culture, and I discovered that I really liked it. I decided on the spot that I would start learning German. Of course, at that age, I had no idea how to go about learning a foreign language at the time. I had already taken half a year of Spanish in middle school. That was the only experience I really had when it came to intentionally learning a language. With Spanish, I did not achieve success. I was uninterested, unmotivated, and unsatisfied with the teaching methods. I began to wonder, how am I going to learn German? I discovered that the CD pamphlets in my Rammstein albums contained lyrics to the songs, alongside German lyrics in their CD Sehnsucht. There was also an English translation. I began to listen to the songs on the CDs and read along with the lyrics, even though I had no idea what most of it meant. Eventually, I began to find similarities between the two languages and discovered what some of the words meant. Basically, even though I didn't know it at that time, I was doing philology to these little lyric pamphlets that came with the CD. And I was kind of linguistically, syntactically analyzing the sentences and figuring out which words were cognates to English words, and being able to decipher some of the words and the meanings. Eventually, I began to find similarities between the two languages and discovered what some of the words meant. I found some websites with basic German lessons and German-English dictionaries. One that I've used for the past 10 years, it's called Dict, DICT.cc. I began to be able to understand the lyrics. They became ingrained in my mind from continual listening to the Rammstein songs. Later I found and began to watch movies in German. I used to torrent a lot of German movies, pirate them. I also began reading German children's books and saying basic things in German with my family when they came to visit. During my first 2 years out of high school, I began to acquire some books about learning the German language. It soon became my secret hobby. None of my friends during that time knew any other languages or had any interest in Rammstein. This is just kind of my own, I guess, nerdy fascination. In my third year of high school, I was able to take a German class. It was an ITV class, meaning that it was a video course presented on a television monitor. Basically, the instructor had a camera with audio on us at all times, while we had the same on her. It was similar to Skype. This was before Skype was even really popular. I studied German in my junior and senior years. Although I learned some grammar and vocabulary, most of the fundamentals I had already learned on my own prior to taking classes in high school. So they didn't get German classes at my high school until I was already a junior in high school. So my freshman and sophomore year, I had just been studying German autodidactically. Still, it was well worth it, as I had a really fun teacher who was wonderful at her job. To this day, I'm convinced that it would be next to impossible to find another language teacher who could surpass her teaching skills, and I still feel that way. Even to this day, it's been more than 10 years since I've been in high school, and I remember her name, Frau Höfendahl. So she was actually originally from Norway, so we could speak some Norwegian together, as well as her being my German teacher. And after my senior year, I wanted to make sure I did not lose my German. During the summer, I studied hard and felt really satisfied with my progress. I still feel quite confident with my German. At the same time, I was thinking about learning another language, so I could say I speak 3 languages. I'm trilingual. I also wanted to have fun, have the fun, life-enriching experience of learning another language again. I figured that since I had so much fun with German, it should be just as fun to learn any other language. I began to try out other languages to see which one interested me the most. I soon encountered a problem. I enjoyed them all. That made it increasingly difficult to choose just one. After trying out Russian, French, Norwegian, Swedish, and Dutch, I concluded that learning another Indo-European language would be too easy. I'm surprised I knew Indo-European back then. This was before I did my linguistics degree. It would probably be easier than learning German, which to me came very naturally. As a result, I began to focus on languages that did not belong to the Indo-European family. So basically, I remember back during this time, I was doing freelance translating for German and making money doing that. And I remember, learning French, Russian, and Norwegian, and Swedish, and Dutch. And I found them very easy. Like, I studied French for a whole month by myself, and I said, wow, this is just too easy. And so I switched and started doing some other languages that were non-European. So I was eventually interested in both Japanese and Chinese. And I chose Chinese over Japanese because it sounded the most foreign to me and seemed harder to pronounce. I thought it would be a fun challenge. It was around that time I chose to learn Chinese that I began to search on the internet about language learning. I was curious to see what methods people were applying to language learning. It wasn't until I searched on YouTube that I was able to find any useful information. I remember one YouTube session when I was searching how to begin learning a language and came across a video with that exact title made by Steve Kaufman. I came away thinking that this guy is a genius and genuinely knows what he is talking about. I started watching all of his videos and through him discovered Moses McCormick, Lao Shu. And through Lao Shu I discovered Loki. I was and still am completely amazed by these three people. Coming across the YouTube Polyglot community forever changed my life. Still feel that way. It motivated me to learn more languages and make my own YouTube channel called Cody Languages, now Hamza the Linguist. Not only did I start learning Chinese, but I also decided to learn Kiswahili. I had wanted to learn an African language eventually, but was motivated to learn it sooner than I had planned. I had a Kenyan in my college algebra class. I had asked him what language I spoke in Kenya, and he told me that it was Swahili. And I thought that was pretty cool, and I said, well, I'd like to learn Swahili. Next thing I knew, I had ordered a Teach Yourself Swahili course and a Swahili phrase book. So Chinese and Swahili are still languages I'm currently learning, when I wrote this. I still keep in touch with my former colleague who was from Nairobi. And even though these days I don't really do much work with Swahili anymore, I still got all my Swahili books and still occasionally speak it, and I've even used it in the workplace before. There are a good number of Swahili speakers here in Minnesota. I'm now entering my sophomore year of college when I was writing this. For the fall semester, I've enrolled in a Mandarin Chinese class, as it is the first semester that my college is offering this language class. I am both eager to take this class and weary of the methodologies that will be implemented by the professor. I have always been an autodidact at nature and have taught myself many skills and hobbies. I have always been weary of formal instruction because it has not usually been as successful for me as learning on my own. I am nonetheless curious to see how the class will be taught. I know that as difficult as learning a Sino-Tibetan language such as Mandarin Chinese is for a native speaker of English, I will not give up on learning independently from formal teaching. No matter what, I am going to learn Chinese, so I have no fear of the class being unsuccessful for me. Once I am confident with my level of Chinese and Swahili, I will continue learning more languages. I am pretty certain that I will continue to learn languages for the rest of my life. That's so far panned out to be true. As for how many or which ones, I do not know. Although nothing is certain, I am reasonably sure that the next language I plan on learning will be Arabic. I have concluded after my experiences trying to acquire Chinese and Swahili simultaneously that I were to attempt to learn two languages simultaneously again, they should belong to the same language family, such as Spanish and Italian. I do not think I will attempt to learn two languages together again unless they're both from the same language family. What methodology you use when learning languages is important, but what is necessary is the right attitude. Attitude is everything. You must have an open mind and be willing to accept a foreign culture and language. Like a parachute, the mind cannot function unless it is open. Also, some people are worried that embracing the foreign language will hurt their identity, or in some sense make them less American or whatever. In reality, it just means you're an American who's bilingual and has a special spot in their heart for a foreign culture. Does not make you any less American. Having the love for the culture, the country, and the people is really important in learning any language. It keeps you motivated. I was so motivated to learn German that I'd be willing to learn any German word I'd come across. I did not care if it was about a subject I was completely uninterested in, because I loved the culture and language so much. Maybe you're not necessarily interested in the culture, but you have some other motivation. I know people who want to learn a language simply because that is their favorite author's mother tongue, and they would want to read their works in the original. Whatever the motivation, it must be there. If you aren't motivated and open-minded, you will not have success. I think that most people forget why language was developed. It was developed for communication. Communication should be your goal when learning a language. Being able to communicate successfully is more important than being perfect. So that was my, old approach, the communicative approach to language. That was the main reason I wanted to study German and Chinese. However, nowadays I find that my main interest is reading and writing. So now when I focus on German, it's primarily to read academic works, and they're structured in a different way. They even use kind of more formal grammar than like a regular German novel. You find a lot of nouns that are or not nouns, but verbs that are formulated differently. So you'd say like ich dachte, like I thought, instead of ich habe gedacht, or something like that. So and it also requires a more in-depth knowledge of grammar, because you get these really long, stringy academic sentences. It's like one sentence in German could be a whole paragraph in English. And unless you really are good at the grammar and you can, differentiate between like die, der, dem, den, and all those types of, things with the cases, it can get a little bit frustrating. But then again, Google Translate and there's a lot of like support online for German that makes it a bit easier. So, it all depends on what your goal is. Communication isn't the goal for everybody and doesn't need to be. So that's also an important thing to keep in mind. So I have a quote here. If you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid. And that's from some Greek guy, Epictetus. I'm not sure who that is anymore. As adults, we tend to be more afraid of making mistakes when speaking. If you make a mistake, it is far from the end of the world. It may be a little embarrassing, but because it was embarrassing, you will not forget the little mistake you made. Life will go on, and you will have learned something new as well. We don't need to have perfect grammar or perfect pronunciation to be able to effectively communicate in a foreign language. People should focus on communication first, and once they can comfortably communicate, they should work on the little details of perfecting their language skills. And as I mentioned before, me and Moses McCormick, me and Lao Shu, we used to kind of bond over Bruce Lee. So I have a Bruce Lee quote in here. It is not how much fixed knowledge you can accumulate, but what you can apply livingly that counts. In real life, you want to be able to get your meaning across instead of knowing 25 verbs in past and future tense. If you want the most success while learning a language, you need to be learning on your own. Try to be independent so that way you can follow your own interests and keep yourself motivated. He who depends on himself will attain the greatest happiness. Yi Jing, Book of Changes, 2nd millennium BC. You know how to learn best more than anybody else. You should seek out the subjects that interest you, which are in the target language. With the World Wide Web, you can find an article in most any language about any subject. Whenever I read an article or watch a video about something that I'm truly interested in, I tend to more readily remember what went on, what new words I discovered, and so on. Many people find retaining information difficult to accomplish when they are just beginning to learn. When you are at a beginner's level, you must simply stick it out. And in the future, you will open yourself up to many interesting articles that will be comprehensible to you. I think that is crucial to learning a language, and every language learner should try to implement it. As a beginner, you should try to get a lot of input. I still believe that. Do not focus on grammar. It's not really important at this stage. You should try to understand what is going on, and maybe every once in a while be able to say something relevant to the conversation. I'd also recommend that people try to focus on pronunciation right away. They should try to learn new sounds that might not be in their language. I do not mean to really focus hard on pronunciation, but just enough to be understood, because that's what's important. For the most part, I believe the same thing nowadays. I do think when you're a beginner, it's extremely important to get a lot of input. And I do think you first need to focus on pronunciation and being able to comprehend the sounds and reproduce them. But my studies are much more hardened and on grammar, and much more focused on grammar nowadays, and memorizing verbs and things like that, and conjugations and case endings and different things like that. I've always told people that if they would like to begin learning a language, they should try to get some language manuals that are made for the beginner level. Some good language manuals, of course, or course books, would be the Teach Yourself series and the Colloquial series. Those are my personal favorites. They still are to this day. But if they do not work out for your learning style, do not worry. There are many other great publications out there. Assamil is a French-made language manual that is known for having funny illustrations and wonderful audio recordings. Pimsleur is also known to be quite good, more for exotic languages like Thai, Indonesian, Arabic, Japanese, and Chinese. That was a very Eurocentric statement. I wouldn't phrase it like that nowadays. No matter what course book you choose, it will definitely not hurt if it is not exactly perfect for your learning style. It is another resource just to help you learn. There's always tons of different books out there. You can find whatever works best for you. People usually say, well, if I read this book, then I will know the language, right? The answer quite simply is no. It won't make you fluent, but it will bring you up to an intermediate level, and you'll be able to pick up new vocabulary and engage in basic conversations. So if you study these books really hard, like Teach Yourself and Colloquial, it'll give you a really good foundation in the language typically. Depends on which language. They're better with some languages than others. Like with the Somali, for the Colloquial series, the Somali one, it's not that great, but it's still probably the best one out there. I don't think you'd be an intermediate speaker, though, after you finished it. But you'd be close. You'd be maybe lower intermediate, or maybe like upper beginner. But it's not as strong as some of the others in that series, the Colloquial series, which I believe is published by Routledge. Oh, it's crazy to think that I have an article coming up with Routledge nowadays. Once you learn the basics of the language, all that's left is increasing your vocabulary and perfecting the small details, i.e. grammar. There are countless ways to do this. I like to get phrase books in the beginning alongside course books because they usually have essential words and phrases for everyday communication. A must-have when trying to increase your vocabulary while learning a language is a good dictionary. Of course, nowadays there's a lot more online dictionaries than there used to be, but I still like having my big, thick, hardcover, hard copy dictionaries. You can never have enough dictionaries for the language you are learning. I started out with a simple English-German pocket dictionary, Taschenbuch, but definitely plan on upgrading to a better one. My favorite foreign language dictionaries are made by Oxford. Still to this day, those are the ones I like. There are many online dictionaries out there as well, which usually have examples in context. Movies, music, and YouTube videos are also great ways to increase vocabulary. I still watch a lot of YouTube videos for various foreign languages, like different lessons and stuff. The more resources you make available to yourself, the more vocabulary you will pick up. I think people usually have the misconception that learning a language is a very difficult thing that requires a lot of hard work, but this is simply not true. Well, I mean, it's kind of true. It does require hard work and sometimes can be difficult, but it's not as bad as you think. You can be really lazy and still learn a language. That is true. If you are constantly exposed to a language in real-life situations, you will learn no matter what, whether you want to or not. This is true. The German citizen Khalid al-Masri was on his way to vacation in Skopje when Macedonian border guards stopped him because of his name. In the Arabic script, it was spelled the same way as a suspected terrorist, al-Masri. He was given to the CIA. He was held in various prisons across the world, and he was interrogated and tortured. During this time, his American captors constantly exposed him to English. He learned English at an advanced level while falsely imprisoned for a year. He spoke English well enough afterwards to do many interviews about his captivity. He never intended to learn English. He never wanted to learn English. But because he was always exposed to it, he naturally picked up the language. Our brains are designated to notice patterns, and if we allow those patterns to be noticed, we allow ourselves to learn. It does not require a lot of serious study to learn a language. It just requires exposure to the language on a regular basis. Whenever I'm doing household chores, driving, etc., I'm always listening to the languages that I am learning. Even when I sleep, I have something on in the background, something in that language. Even to this day, I might throw on, with my smartphone, like academic lecture in my target language, and I'll fall asleep to that. I usually listen to the dialogues from my colloquial and teach yourself books. I put them on my MP3 player and listen whenever I am on the go. By hearing these dialogues over and over again, they become stuck in my head, much like a favorite song would. Through repeated exposure, I can memorize certain words and phrases to the point that they become automatic. I soon start to think in that language due to the constant input. You literally do not have much of anything. You do not have to do much of anything except listen. You can be lazy and still learn a language. I think this should be a tactic for every language learner. You must make the environment one in which you're always being exposed to your target language. Now, this works really good for living languages, contemporary languages, but nowadays I'm more interested in studying dead languages, or maybe not dead is the best word, but you might say liturgical languages, or literary languages that are not typically spoken on a regular basis in normal situations. For instance, I'm just in the beginning stages of trying to learn some Syriac, and it's pretty hard to find like MP3 conversations and stuff for Syriac. Colloquial and teach yourself, I don't believe they have any manuals for Syriac, so some of these types of languages can be a little bit more difficult. Classical Arabic is another one. It's they have the teach yourself and colloquial and all those manuals. They focus on modern standard Arabic, which is different than classical medieval Arabic in quite a lot of ways. The grammar is simplified. The vocabulary is different. Certain words mean completely different things in certain contexts. So it can be a little bit more challenging. And when I was writing this, I was more thinking of contemporary spoken languages. To maintain or acquire fluency in a foreign language, you must be consistent and set some sort of goal. The reality is, if you do not keep yourself exposed to the language, you will regress and forget it. It's true to a certain extent. You regress and forget it in the sense that it's not so quick to retrieve in your brain, but when you go back to it and practice with it, it all comes right back real fast. I've learned that, especially with my German and Chinese and Swahili. I try to keep myself exposed to each language I have learned on a daily basis. Every day I try to watch videos or read something in the target languages. You cannot ever truly say that you have learned a language because you are limiting yourself by doing so. And I mean that you've mastered a language. Learning is continuous. Without a goal, you will not know how much time to put into your language learning in a day. Let's say you are just beginning to learn Japanese. It is a language that for native speakers of English takes a lot of time to learn. drastically different. A language like Japanese will require a lot of patience, while in the beginning stages you'll want to devote more time a day to study than if you're at an advanced level. If your goal is to get to an intermediate level within 6 months, I'd say try studying 2 to 3 hours a day. Spend most of the time listening, but do not neglect reading, writing, and speaking. Without a goal or constant exposure, before it can have any value, this is blatantly false. Being at only a basic conversational level in a language can enrich your life in so many different ways. Just showing that you're trying to understand somebody's language will show that you're truly accepting of their culture. And that's panned out for me a lot in life. My Chinese, I consider it at more of a basic conversational level. My Somali's basic conversational level, but I have intermediate reading ability with it. And that served me well in life, and being able to speak those languages in certain contexts, even though I'm not fluent. It makes communication a lot easier. Especially I like to speak a lot with the Somali elders, and most of them, they don't speak English very well. And just between the little bit of English they know and the little bit of Somali I know, we're usually, and maybe some Arabic if they know Arabic, we're usually able to communicate quite effectively. Another thing that people must consider when learning a language, I just read that. So I have a quote here, I think it's Rome fait comme les Romains. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right. My French is still beginning stages. But basically, when in Rome, be like the Romans. That's a pretty famous saying there. French proverb. People of that culture whose language you are learning will see your efforts and be more apt to talk to you and feel comfortable around you. You can also make new friends simply because you can speak a little bit of their language. I get plenty of enjoyment if I can understand only 60% of a movie in Mandarin Chinese, or partially understand a German short story. I can still say the same today, even if I'm reading in Arabic. Usually I have higher percentage of understanding in Arabic because I'm advanced in Arabic. But still, even if I partially understand something, I still can thoroughly enjoy it. If I'm reading Kalila wa Dimna or something like that. People must realize that there is great value to having only partial knowledge in a foreign language. Knowing a foreign language is the most beneficial self-improvement activity one can do. It will enrich your life in ways you would never imagine, and it will forever change the way you think about the world around you. Language shapes the way we think and determines what we can think about. Benjamin Lee Whorf. Knowing another language is looking at life from a completely different viewpoint. You're not only learning the language, but also about the culture and people who speak that language. You can't fully learn a language without learning the culture, and vice versa. When you learn another culture and language, you learn another perspective on the world. You can take things you like from that culture, further enrich your life, and get a new perspective on many things. A real practical benefit in knowing a foreign language is that it will always improve your prospects for employment, or at the very least, it will not hurt them. It can improve your salary by making you more valuable to the company, since you are able to communicate with more people. I had a friend who spoke good Spanish. He got paid extra at Walmart because he could help Spanish-speaking customers. Even at a job like Walmart, it's beneficial to know a foreign language. It gives you an edge over monolingual applicants. There are many fields where knowing a foreign language can be extremely beneficial, such as government agencies, the travel industry, engineering, communications, education, international law, economics, publishing, advertisement. The list goes on. Wer fremde Sprache nicht kennt, weiß nichts von seiner eigenen. Those who know nothing of foreign languages know nothing of their own. Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. Research has shown that people who know a foreign language are far more effective at communication in their own mother tongue. They have better memory, test scores, and literacy. I have discovered that after studying languages, my vocabulary has increased exponentially in English. It is like food for your brain. If it is good for you, why not eat it? So the thing about learning a foreign language is there are terms that are more common in other languages that aren't used in English very much. And by constantly having to learn those words in another language, because they're often used in that language, you in turn learn that word in English, even though it might be more obscure in the English language. So it does increase your vocabulary quite a lot. There are so many benefits to language learning. If I were to write about them all, I would have to write an entire book. Leaving my room in the mansion was the best decision I ever made. So leaving the room in the mansion, i.e. stepping away from monolingualism, was the best decision I ever made. It has enriched my life in countless ways. I'm so grateful for the experiences as a young adult, which got me ready and geared up for learning foreign languages. Through the process of learning languages, I have discovered many things that have improved my language learning. I have discovered that it is mostly the attitude you have about the language and how motivated and interested you are in that language that is most important. I hope and pray that all of you reading this will begin a new language learning adventure. So go out right now, buy a course book, and start studying. You at least owe me that. So that is my chapter from the Polyglot Project. I hope you enjoyed it. It's kind of fun for me to go back and read something that I wrote in 2010 approximately. And that's it. I hope you enjoyed. Please give it a like below and subscribe. Thank you very much.